She kept her head down when he followed her. She stayed composed when he pulled her over. But the moment he chose to embarrass her in public, that's when everything changed. It happened in the corridor between fourth and fifth period, with students rushing to class. Amira Johnson, 17, tightly gripped her notebook against her chest. She wasn't timid, just focused. Early college acceptance letters already lined her inbox. A future lawyer in the making. She moved quickly, avoiding eye contact like she always did. No drama, no gossip, just her studies, and her dreams. But that Thursday morning, her routine shattered. Officer Mitch Callahan, a school cop with too much time and too little oversight, was standing near the vending machines, cracking jokes with a few students. Amira walked past him, as usual. She never acknowledged him, but this time, he stepped into her path, too close. "You in a hurry, sweetheart?" he asked, loud enough for the others to hear. Amira stopped, puzzled. "Excuse me?" Callahan smirked. Then with a flick of his wrist, a bottle of juice tilted in his hand and, accidentally, spilled all over her shirt. Gasps. Laughter. Her papers hit the floor. The hallway turned into a stage. "Oops," Callahan said dryly. "Maybe next time. Watch where you're going." The cold liquid soaked through her blouse. Her hair dripped. Her heart pounded. But Amira didn't argue, didn't even speak. She just gathered her things, turned, and walked away. But in her eyes, there wasn't just embarrassment. There was something else. Fear and confusion. It happened during the break between third and fourth period, right in the middle of the school's main hallway. Amira Coleman walked with her arms wrapped tightly around her books, moving fast like always. Her eyes never met anyone's. Not from fear, but focus. 17, top of her class, already accepted into 2 Ivy League schools. She was that kind of student. No drama, no mess, just dreams and discipline. But that Thursday, things took a sharp turn. Officer Rick Delaney, the school's assigned safety officer and part-time town cop, stood near the vending machines chatting casually with a couple of students. Amira tried to walk past without making eye contact, as she always did. But Delaney stepped into her path, forcing her to stop. Loud enough for nearby students to hear, he asked, "Hey, Missy, you too important to say hello?" Amira looked up, surprised. "Excuse me?" He smirked, then, almost like it was an accident, tipped a water bottle he'd been holding. The cold splash hit her square in the chest. Gasping, she stumbled backward, books and papers slipping from her arms. Students nearby burst into laughter. One even filmed it on their phone. Delaney didn't apologize. "Guess someone's having a clumsy day," he said, shrugging. Amira stood frozen, drenched, her hair dripping, her shirt clinging to her skin. The humiliation crawled across her face like wildfire, but she didn't respond. She just picked up her soaked papers, turned around, and walked away. But that look in her eyes, that wasn't just embarrassment. That was fear, too. She didn't cry in the bathroom, didn't tell anyone. But inside, something had cracked. The following morning, everything seemed normal, on the surface. Students returned to their routines. The hallways buzzed with chatter and the clatter of lockers. But Amira, she walked slower, more cautious than usual. Her clothes were dry, her face composed, but the sparkle she usually carried in her stride had dimmed. Around lunchtime, a school administrator asked her to come to the front office. When she arrived, 2 men were waiting, not in uniforms, but in suits. "Miss Coleman," one of them said calmly, "we're with Internal Affairs. Do you mind answering a few questions about yesterday?" Amira blinked, surprised. "You're not with the school." "No, ma'am," the second man replied. "We're federal." Amira's heart skipped a beat. Her father had always told her, if something ever happened and someone said, "We're federal," she should listen carefully. "Is this about Officer Delaney?" she asked. The men exchanged glances. "We're aware there was an incident, but this goes beyond him." Confused but curious, Amira sat down. One agent pulled out a file. Inside were photos, not of her, not of the school, but of her father, in combat gear. "Your father is Sergeant Major Daniel Coleman, correct?" Amira nodded slowly. "Yeah, but nobody at school knows that." The agent leaned in. "They do now. Yesterday's incident triggered a flag in the Department of Defense system. There's a protection protocol for family members of Tier 1 operators. Amira sat up straighter. Wait, they're tracking me? Not exactly, the man clarified. But if a threat is detected, the system responds. Fast. So, what happens now? Amira asked. The agent closed the folder and said, Now, we make sure it doesn't happen again. That afternoon, the atmosphere at the local police department felt tense. Word had gotten around that 2 officers were under investigation, and nobody liked the silence that followed. Officer Delaney sat in an interrogation room, arms crossed, trying to play it cool. Across from him sat a stone-faced federal investigator. You know why you're here? The agent asked bluntly. I did my job. That girl was being disrespectful, Delaney replied. The agent slid a folder across the table. Inside were security camera stills, audio transcripts, and witness reports, all contradicting Delaney's version of the story. Your job doesn't include threatening minors or targeting students based on race? The agent said coldly. Meanwhile, back at school, Amira was called into the counselor's office. But this time, it wasn't for trouble. We owe you an apology, the counselor said sincerely. No student should be made to feel unsafe here. Amira looked at her, unsure how to respond. It felt strange, like someone had finally turned on a light in a dark hallway. That evening, she returned home to find her father waiting on the porch. He stood up as she approached and without a word hugged her tight. You good? He asked after a long pause. She nodded against his chest. Yeah, I think I am. You stood your ground. I'm proud of you, he whispered. As they sat on the porch, watching the sky fade into stars, a new kind of silence settled over them. Not heavy or tense, but peaceful. The kind of quiet that follows a storm. The next morning, news broke across social media and local headlines. Teen harassed by police, turns out. Her dad is a decorated Delta Force commander. The story spread like wildfire. People everywhere were talking about how a young black girl stood up for herself and revealed a truth no one saw coming. At school, students who once laughed or stayed silent now looked at Amira with a mix of awe and shame. Some apologized. Others just gave her space. During morning assembly, the principal made a rare announcement. We are implementing new training for our staff and working with law enforcement to ensure our school is a safe and fair environment for all students. Amira sat quietly, not needing applause or attention. She didn't do it to be famous. She just wanted to be treated like everyone else. That night, her father placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside was a worn military badge, dog tags, and a medal. I never wanted you to have to know about all this like that, he said, but now you do, and you handled it better than I ever could. Amira picked up the badge, holding it in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. You fought battles I never saw, she said. Now I understand why you always told me to stay strong. They didn't say much after that. They didn't have to. Sometimes respect doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing tall when the world tries to push you down. And Amira? She stood taller than ever. If you were moved by Amira's story, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder of what courage really looks like. In a world where people are too quick to judge, it only takes one voice to make a difference. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Amira's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that empower, uplift, and open minds. Thanks for watching, and always remember, you never know who someone really is until it's too late.